No wind of change. A new military operation in Atyrau. The insider's case. Aktau court proceeded to hearing of arguments. Kazlak archipelago. Inmates beating in the Karabas prison and spontaneous protests of convicts' mothers and wives. Hello, I'm Asylbek Abdulov and you're watching Vlast KZ on KpLus channel.
На излете недели президент Назарбаев все-таки
At the end of the past week, President Nazarbayev finally dismissed his chief of staff Aslan Musin, proving right weeks-long rumors. All this time, internet agencies enthusiastically published articles on the matter, citing insider sources, who it turns out were very accurately reflecting the situation around Aslan Musin, his protege, the former governor of Atyrau region Bergey Ryskaliyev, and his brother, ex-MP Amanjan Ryskaliyev. Earlier in the week, website Respublika published a reader's letter which claimed that the night of September 14th, when unidentified men attacked the police station in Atyrau, Bergey Ryskaliev's men aggressively rode around the city in their SUVs. The police didn't bother to stop them and even led to Bergey's brother. The source said the family already fled the country since Nazarbayev is supposedly afraid of them and let them leave to avoid further aggravation of the situation. The letter also said that the brother's patron, Aslan Musin, will soon lose his chief of staff chair and will be moved to an unimportant position. Friday events confirmed the accuracy of these forecasts when the president appointed Musin as the new chairman of the Accounts Committee for control over the execution of the state budget.
Председателем счетного комитета по контролю за исполнением республиканского бюджета.
In fact, they tied his hands by this very position. Now that he is the chairman of the Accounts Committee, he will have to expose those regional governors and the leadership of central administration officers, whom he personally appointed as the head of administration. Experts unanimously assert that the dismissal of Aslan Musin is Nurtay Bakayev's victory in inter-clan confrontation, despite President Nazarbayev's vocal criticism of the National Security Committee said this past summer for frequent terrorist attacks and other emergencies in the country.
Президент Назарбаев подверг его публичной критике в связи с участившимися в стране терактами.
At the time, Nazarbayev balanced his act by dealing a political blow to Musin and appointing Prime Minister Masimov as the head of the Police Certification Commission, although the task was previously assigned to the head of the president's administration. Back then, he had full control over the Interior Ministry, just hardened by Zhanozyan massacre. Musin's removal from the police purging was the first sign of his diminishing influence. Many believed Musin went over his head while playing political games, and his rivals managed to convince the head of state that's indeed happened.
Отказ от услуг Мусина в чистке полицейских рядов стал первым признаком.
All of this led to an extended campaign to dismiss the president's chief of staff and his close circle. On August 15th, Nazarbayev personally fired the governor of Atyrau region Bergey Ryskaliyev, and a month later his brother Amanjan was stripped of his parliamentary powers. The intrigue around their future strangely coincided with armed clashes in the Atyrau region.
15 августа президент лично снял с должности акима Атырауской области Бергея Ryskalieva.
Put the camera away, put it away, or else we will have to put you behind bars. On Friday, Kokdam micro-district of Atyrau was cordoned off by internal security troops and about 200 policemen, fully equipped and armed military ambulance vehicles, fire trucks, and even armored infantry vehicles. According to security forces themselves, they were having an exercise in action. My father-in-law woke us up in the morning, saying that he's seen a lot of policemen outside. They visited us and told us not to go outside. One of the policemen warned me that any of us might catch a bullet accidentally. I climbed up the roof and watched out of curiosity. I saw a few bullets flying by and a couple of explosions. Local residents report that they were not paying attention to who lived in a small rundown house in the neighborhood. All of us, everyone who lived in the neighborhood, were brought outside, away from here. I heard machine gun fire. I personally do not know, but people say that Wahhabis lived there. Only after the combat operation was over, the General Prosecutor's Office made a media release, shortly stating that a special operation was held in Natarao district to neutralize individuals suspected in the attack on the local Department of Internal Affairs and patrol officers on September 15th. According to official data, the 4 suspects refused to surrender. Instead, they opened return fire and were eliminated. Parts of improvised explosive devices and weapons were later found in the house. I only need justice. According to security forces, Baksulu Atarbayeva's son Yelaman was one of the eliminated terrorists. 5 more individuals were killed during the special operation in the small town of Kulsari on September 12th. One survivor is in critical condition at the regional hospital. A resident of the first micro-district, Umirzak Jakupov, lives in an apartment block just across the building where the special operation was held. When the snipers began climbing up the roof of his apartment block, he could not even think that in a few minutes they would kill his nephew, Yelaman. The policemen used gas bombs and shot almost all the suspects who ran out onto the balcony and their stair landing. Umirzak claims that only security forces were shooting. This is plain politics, because the fight against terrorism is politics. Those guys did not shoot. People say there was Omon riot police deployed from Astana, and they could have evacuated the residents and captured the terrorists. If I was a terrorist, I would have blown myself up, but none of them did it. See that briefcase over there? There was no explosion. It is just for show. The Atarbayevs is the family of many children. Baksulu had 10 children, and now that Yelaman was killed, there are only 9 left. Poverty is the first thing that catches the eye in their apartment. The day after the raid, the police came to their apartment, searching and taking pictures of all the alleged evidence. The apartment where the suspects were eliminated belongs to the eldest son, Bakhit Atarbayev. Bakhit and another one of his brothers were arrested on charges of terrorism. The mother's been collecting these screws, and the police confiscated some of them. Now they claim that my brother was trying to assemble a bomb using those screws. There was no bomb, they were simply with machine guns, and everyone heard this. 17-year-old Bakbirgan Zoldabayev is now the eldest in the family. The empty tomb was arranged for Yelaman. Bakbirgan says that they did not have time to get permission from the National Security Committee and had to bury their brother in Natarao. The police informed the Yelaman's relatives that he blew himself up, yet his family does not believe it. My sister's husband's relative named Askhat is the department head of the Regional Department of Internal Affairs. He kept saying that my older brother committed an act of suicide bombing. I asked him whether he thinks that my sister Mahabat is also a bad person and whether she's from the poor family. He said no. Then I told him that my sister and my brothers are exactly the same. My brothers are not terrorists. The police executed them without legitimate criminal investigations and court decisions. Baksulu Atarbayeva rushed about the National Security Committee department and hospital for 2 days, trying to get her son's body. After the funeral, she kept coming there on a daily basis, trying to figure out where 2 of her sons are detained and what they're accused of. My children are innocent. I refuse to believe that they blew themselves up. My 21-year-old youngest son received a fatal headshot, but when I came to the morgue around September 15 to collect his body, his stomach was sliced open as if he blew himself up. If they wanted to blow themselves up, why would they run outside when police threw a smoke grenade inside? 2 fresh graves in Kulsari cemetery belong to the brothers Sabir and Daulat Januzakov. They were also among the group that was eliminated during the special operation. Januzakovs were the neighbors of Atarbayevs and happened to be in that very apartment along with Yelaman on September 12th. According to the Januzakov family, that day some friends from Atarao arrived to see the boys. One of them was identified as Yezbol Imankulov, while the identity of the second individual has not yet been established. The parents of brothers Januzakov are convinced that their children just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, yet they refuse to talk about it openly. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to keep it to myself, but I will do what I have to do. The Zhazakbayev High School number 16, which Atarbayev and Januzakovs graduated from, is located near the ill-fated apartment block number 22. Teachers describe all 3 of them as diligent students who did not stand amidst their peers. Khanshayim Baisim Girieva recalls how she met Sabir on the bus after graduation, but barely recognized her former student. About 3 or 4 years ago, I've noticed that those boys started to grow beards. Since Sabir graduated a long time ago, I do not know what he was up to. But I met him on the bus once. He had a beard, he was wearing short pants, and didn't even say hello to me. There is only one mosque in Kulsari. It is originally state-run and is under the spiritual administration of Muslims. The Imam, Arman Isaif, who has been working here for 18 months, confirmed that about 30% of the parishioners are devoted to Salafi movement, which differs from the traditional Hanafi Islam. He said that there are many devotees of Takfiri Islamic movement. They do not attend the mosque and they worship Allah in their houses and apartments. They read religious literature on the internet. In my opinion, they were devotees of Takfirism. The Takfirists consider other Muslims as infidels and unbelievers. They recognize neither the constitutional order nor the state with its secular laws, while killing the infidels, in their opinion, is halal. In other words, they rid the world of infidels and haram. But we should remember that jihad is a sacred concept, while they are misleading people and misinterpreting the concept of jihad. Kulsari residents admit that there are so many representatives of radical Islamic movements in their area, including Neo-Kharijism, Takfirism, and Wahhabism. Some say that there are as many of them in the area as traditional Muslims. There are different opinions on this matter. They don't talk to anyone. They only say hello. Why? I do not know. Perhaps it is against their beliefs. Wahhabis should be eradicated from society. It is necessary to expel them from educational institutions. In this respect, our president did worse than the president of Uzbekistan. He should have gathered them all together and did something to intimidate them. They should have educated the youth, telling them the right Muslim movements from the wrong. According to official information, the explosion heard by Gulzana led the security forces to Kulsari. Her neighbors living in 94 Moldagulova Street, the young family were renting the shed, making their living by selling pizza. Gulzada stayed home with the baby when she heard the explosion, then she called an ambulance. General's prosecutor office reported that Nurulbek Sakauov accidentally blew himself up. The police arrested the man who was renting them a house. According to Gulzada, the landlord of the shed, Ruslan had a beard and his wife was wearing a burqa, but they never seemed suspicious. The lieutenant, Ruslan, came out and asked to call an ambulance because there was a guy dying in his house. I did not understand what was going on. I thought something happened on the street. I went inside the house to call the ambulance, but my hands were shaking from what he told me about the person dying in the house. The deceased Nurulbek Sakauov was only 21 years old. His mother believes that her son was used, yet she does not deny that he belonged to the peculiar religious movement. Switch it off. Have you not figured out what is right and what is wrong yet? I will not let you dishonor us. Don't you dare film anyone. I insist. If you want to investigate, then you should start with them. You need to sort it out. My soul is here. They are innocent. August 9th was the last time I saw my son. He had changed. He shaved off his mustache and beard. He started looking like a decent boy. He swore to me that he will never dishonor me. My son would have never done such a disgrace. The silence by law enforcement agencies regarding the armed incidents went over the line. The city is full of rumors. Atara reinforcing all posts and patrols. Policemen were issued body armor and weapons. The press service of the Department of Internal Affairs and Prosecutor's Office insist that their leadership is on official vacation, yet in private explain that the instructions was not to disclose information from Astana. The attempts to meet with the new head of the region, Bakhtikhoja Izmukhambetov, have led to no avail as well. In the meantime, the speculations over terrorist events in Atara only multiply the rumors. Opposition journalist Romanbay Dospanov believes that frequent bombings and attacks on security forces are the tools of political power struggle, which have escalated dramatically upon the resignation of Birgay Eskaliyev and dismissal of the head of the presidential administration, Aslan Musin. I believe that Asalbek, the son of Aslan Musin, who frequently travels abroad and perhaps decided to stay there, is directly involved with the recent terrorist attacks. It is primarily directed against the president's ultimate support, the National Security Committee, because we all know that the Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Defense work a bit different. Atara Regional Court issued arrest warrants for 2 more young men born in 1982 and 1992. One of them is the resident of Kulsari and the other one is from Makhambet region area. Both of them were detained and charged with terrorism under Article 203, Part 4. It is not clear what particular events the investigation associates detainees with. Security officials remain silent.
Next on Vlast KZ. The Insider's Case. Aktau Court proceeded to hearing of arguments. Kazlak Archipelago. Inmates beating in the Karabas prison and spontaneous protests of convicts' mothers and wives. Stay with us, Vlast KZ will return with more in a couple of minutes.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublikas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы – в Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook – facebook.com/respublica.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале KplusTV.
В октябре стартовал повторный судебный процесс.
The retrial over the former Zhanaozen mayor Orak Sarbapeyev is underway in October. This past summer, the jury of the Mangistau Inter-District Regional Court acquitted him of bribery and abuse of office charges. However, on August 2nd, the Regional Court cancelled the ruling and sent Sarbapeyev back to jail. The new trial was decided to be held further away from defendant and his fellow countrymen's home region. A similar story happened with Sarbapeyev's predecessor, when on July 20th, the former Zhanaozen mayor Zhalgas Babakhanov was sentenced to 2 years in probation, but the objection of prosecutor led the appeals board of the Mangistau Regional Court to review the ruling and sentence him to 2 years in prison on September 14th. This way, the prosecutor's office was trying to save the reputation of their head Askhad Daulbayev, who once said that the illegal actions of Zhanaozen mayors Babakhanov and Sarbapeyev promoted social unrest and prolonged the strike of oil workers that escalated into a riot. Financial police has revealed that these individuals, despite the interests of the city residents, for several years were embezzling funds provided for socio-economic support of local population and oil workers. According to the investigation, the embezzlements were made by the former and current mayors of Zhanaozen, Babakhanov and Sarbapeyev. The significance of the roles and accountability of local authorities responsible for Zhanaozen events, including strikers and violence, is almost forgotten now. The president's administration decided that oil workers, opposition politicians, incendiaries and other enemies of the state system are the ones to blame for everything that happened in Zhanaozen.
Conversations over Skype were examined at the trial over Kozlov Sapargali and oilman Aminov this week. The prosecution presented them as material evidence of Agha party leader's guilt. As public activist Rasad Alkuan Shalinin contends, the plaintiff did not get the results it was looking for. These conversations proved once again that Kozlov was unaware of what was going on and what was being planned to offer any directions. Moreover, when we were listening to Kozlov's conversation with Atabayev, it became clear when Atabayev spoke about certain forces with extremist intentions planning to stand their ground to the end, that was when we witnessed surprise expressed by Kozlov.
В этот момент мы видим удивление Козлова. А что это? Ты терроризм? Я считаю, что, в общем-то, отчет у нас состоялся.
I believe our report was successful. The head of state approved the report and issued instructions to all structures of the executive branch. Behind the scenes at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Chairman of the Human Rights Committee Quvanish Sultanov speaks about his fruitful work without hiding his joy. His report on the human rights situation of the Republic of Kazakhstan in 2011 was positively evaluated not only by the president, but other international and domestic experts. According to the report, human rights in Kazakhstan are mostly violated in the area of labor and in private companies. However, the document fails to mention last year's 8-month oil workers' strike in Mangistau region, which ended in a bloody conflict. Report on the human rights situation in the Republic of Kazakhstan in 2011. Human Rights Committee under the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Not a single person was prosecuted in 2011 for violating procedures of assembly. In the last 2 years, not one participant in demonstrations suffered from the actions of law enforcement officials, and only 24 assemblies were banned due to gross violations of their conduct. The present document is a real indicator of the endeavors that are made in the area of human rights and Kazakhstan's adherence to widely accepted standards and obligations in the human measurement.
Unfortunately, in some cases we will explain our findings, they are not. Human Rights Watch is a non-political organization. We were interested only in whether the rights of the workers concerned were being respected as soon as we can, as soon as we've translated it also into English.
The Human Rights Watch report, Oil and Strikes, goes against the official report. NGO staff members visited Mangistau region twice. Human Rights Watch devoted its work exclusively to the labor conflict between oil workers and employers. They conclude that Kazakhstan's authorities reacted inadequately to workers' labor demands.
In addition, Human Rights Watch also documented the use of repressive freedom of assembly legislation to fine and imprison oil workers and others who visited the strikes last year. Broadly speaking, the report documents 5 key.
Another watchdog, American Human Rights Foundation, announced the launch of its campaign to investigate the Kazakh government's crimes against humanity this week. Our republic entered the list of countries with an authoritarian regime along with Equatorial Guinea and Singapore. There are governments across the world where the human rights situation is on a deplorably low level, but due to economic reasons as well as strong PR, these governments were able to escape attention. We believe that Kazakhstan, Equatorial Guinea, and Singapore are these types of governments. The political authority in these countries are ruled by strong dictatorships. The director of the Central Asian Fund for the Development of Democracy, Talgana Umbitalieva, knows the reason why the human rights reports in Kazakhstan are so different. The reason lies in differing goals and evaluation criteria.
Комиссия по правам человека, у них какая цель? Скажем так, продемонстрировать всему миру.
What is the Human Rights Committee's goal? To demonstrate to the rest of the world its ideal policy, that we are approaching democracy by leaps and bounds. That is why the criteria are chosen to attain that result. International organizations mostly work on quality due to their reputation. Plus, they have worked in the field for a long time, and their criteria are different. They need quality and objectivity. According to Tulgalay Umbitalieva, the government report is yet again undermining the public's trust. It is not favorable for the current regime to talk about Janauzian.
Если власть признает факт Жанаузена и митингов, это будет лишь означать одно, что власть неэффективна.
If the government admits its fault in Janauzian, it will indicate their ineffectiveness, that their leader is not that long-sighted and is a weak political figure, as opposed to how they position themselves, where he makes decisions not allowing a situation where there are shootings inside the country. Janauzian proves otherwise, and the president pretends to believe this report.
Чтобы не допустить такую ситуацию, когда в собственной стране стреляют, собственный народ.
While the report was ceremoniously presented to the Presidential Human Rights Committee in Astana, material evidence was examined in Aktau, and Moscow's expert opinions were heard. The oppositionist statements in the case materials are aimed at preventing violence. They specifically pose the question on the subject, but I am expressing the opinion of someone who is familiar with case materials. As for the instance related to insults towards a government official and government agencies, there are 2 cases where Kozlov calls the authorities brutish in connection with the Janauzian events, and an unknown blogger's comments, calling the police dirty coppers. These are the only 2 statements in the entire case. Hearings will begin on Monday in an Aktau court. Litigation in the Janauzian case, which went on for 5 months, is reaching its finish line. The sentence is obvious for many, as obvious as the fact that Kozlov, Sapargali, and Aminov's trial will go unnoticed by Kazakhstan's Human Rights Commission, much like the events over which they are being tried themselves.
Military
operations were conducted this past week not only in the western part of the country in Atyrau, where they are now seen as a regular routine, but also in central Kazakhstan, in Karaganda region. About 600 soldiers of national troops and special forces were moved to Karabas village, home of the local minimum security prison settlement. Inmates' family members, mostly mothers and wives, tried to interfere while protesting against punitive operations, but were pushed aside. The CCS classified this state of emergency in the prison system as implementation of planned search activities. This is AK-159/18 colony in the village of Karabas of Karaganda region. According to the inmates' relatives, on September 20th, 400 troops entered the colony along with 200 so-called armored people in masks. The families of prisoners began to gather around as well. They say that inventory of the full search of the premises is taking place.
Люди, солдаты в масках. Это первая рота, да? Да. Просто с утра было людей гражданских мало, и мы дорогу не смогли практически перекрыть.
According to the inmates' relatives, the situation developed as follows. From the very Thursday morning, all the colony inmates were rounded up to the parade ground, where they sat on the haunches till the very supper. The relatives claimed that they had seen soldiers beating the prisoners. I climbed up the crane and I could see how the undressed inmates were laying on the ground. You could tell who was emotionally broken down. Those who signed the document were lying on the ground, while the rest of them were getting beat up with batons. The inmates' family spent over 10 hours demanding the prison administration to negotiate. In response, the prison chief promised that his subordinates will make video of all the imprisoned relatives of those who gathered outside the colony. The long-promised video was revealed to the relatives towards the midnight. One by one, they would go inside the visitors' control point to make sure that there were no signs of physical abuse on the bodies of their close ones. 32 prisoners were subjected to physical force and PR-73 special means. During the confiscation of contraband from the convicts, they expressed their disagreement and pushed prison personnel using foul language. We are inclined to pacify the instances of physical resistance. There were only 40 out of all prisoners captured on video. Relatives of the inmates started expressing their protest. People were on the edge as tension kept escalating. Finally, people in the crowd started throwing rocks at policemen. Later, 20 people were arrested for vicious disobedience to the police. Lyudmila Stanko arrived to support her friend, whose husband is serving a sentence in AK-159/18 penal colony. Of course, I didn't have the right to talk like this. Apparently, it's illegal. However, we were in the state of shock, acting hysterical when we've learned about 6 dead among the inmates. There were some individuals who caused this gathering to turn into a mob with disruptive behavior. There was alcohol involved. People were yelling and whistling before midnight past the bedtime period. 20 women were detained and pleaded guilty in court. Lyudmila, along with other participants, was fined for disobeying the police and organizing the unauthorized protest action for a total of $1,335. Special prosecutor recognized these actions as legal and said that on September 20th there will be a planned inspection in AK-159/18. Khairullah Aidbekov says that none of the prisoners had been tortured. On the contrary, 10 of the inmates have caused themselves injuries. Now, according to the prosecutor, the colony is quiet. We've filmed the inmates with video cameras and shown the footage to the crowd. It decreased the tension and people began to leave the scene. Showing the video to mothers, fathers and wives of the prisoners in order to set their minds at rest was a priority. Dozens of relatives are still waiting outside the gates of the colony. They still have not received any evidence that their loved ones are all right. I haven't seen it because they only partially revealed the footage. They informed us that it was going to be a bad time for the inmates and that we should come back in the morning. They promised to show us everything, although when we asked them, they told me the opposite. They said it wasn't my business and that I should go home and the inmates are going to be fine. How are we going to sit at home when this is happening to them? According to the official data, 2 prisoners who inflicted self-injuries were rendered medical aid. It is not clear when and how the visits to the colony will resume. It is also reported that the inspection of the facility resulted in confiscation of 50 mobile phones and other prohibited items. You were watching Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel. Trends, highlights and personalities of the past week. Goodbye.
Всего вам доброго и до новых встреч.